The rain was coming down in thin, icy threads, the kind that didn't splash so much as whisper against the pavement. It was just past 6 a.m., the city still stretching awake, streetlights flickering against puddles that looked like mirrors someone had stepped on. Inside the quiet lobby of Hartwell, Innovations, a glass giant of a building that seemed to pinch the low clouds, Elias Monroe stood completely still, dripping rainwater onto the polished marble floor. He clutched his phone in both hands, an old scratched-up model with a screen cracked so precisely it looked like a spiderweb. The battery was barely holding on, the case chipped at every corner. It wasn't just outdated, it was practically prehistoric, but he held it like it mattered. Because it did. He kept glancing from the phone to the elevator as if waiting for courage to arrive. "Daddy?" Don't forget, a small voice echoed in his memory. His daughter, Lily. 7 years old, heart made of sunlight, and lungs that struggled more days than not. "Don't forget my inhaler at the pharmacy." They said today, "Daddy, okay?" He had promised. He always promised, but promises were only as strong as the paycheck behind them. And today the check might vanish before he could even earn it. He needed this meeting. Without this freelance contract, he had no way to afford the medication she needed for the next month. He adjusted his faded jacket, wiped his palms on his jeans, and tried to swallow the ache sitting at the back of his throat. Everything about him looked out of place in the pristine lobby. The designer-suited people passing by barely registered him just a damp. Single dad trying not to fall apart. The elevator chimed. Out stepped CEO, Alexandra Hartwell. She walked like a gust of purpose-sharp heels. Charcoal suit, hair pinned in a neat twist that added 4 inches of authority. Her presence was a temperature change. But Elias straightened as though she'd physically pulled him upright. She didn't look up from her phone. She approached the reception desk. But the receptionist nearly sprang to attention. "Good morning, Ms. Hartwell." "Morning," she replied, flipping through emails. "Is the contractor here yet? The one who insisted I meet him personally?" Her voice was clipped, impatient. The receptionist lifted her eyes toward Elias. Alexandra finally looked up, and her gaze landed on the cracked, outdated phone he was gripping with both hands. The corner of her lips twitched once to something that wasn't quite a smile, more like disbelief or amusement. Like someone just spotted a relic in a museum exhibit labeled technology. The early struggles, she didn't say anything. Not yet. But the look said enough. He felt heat climb his neck. She stepped forward, eyebrow raised. "You're Elias Monroe." "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "And this is what you're working with?" she asked, nodding at the old phone. He swallowed. It does the job." Her laugh wasn't loud, but in the cold lobby, it echoed like a dropped coin. She looked him up and down, her eyes outlining every struggle he was fighting to hide. Then she exhaled sharply, like she was already done with. Let's make this quick." She walked toward the hallway without waiting for him to follow. He did anyway. Each step felt heavier than the last. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they walked past glass windows showing conference rooms filled with people who seemed carved from confidence. Alexandra kept walking, her heels clicking in a rhythm that matched her tone, precise, efficient, uninterested. "Your proposal said you were a field specialist," she said. "But no offense, you don't look like someone who's handled a major corporate project recently." Elias clenched his jaw. No offense always meant a lot of offense. "I've done good work," he said softly. "For whom?" she asked without looking at him. He stared at the back of her suit jacket, the immaculate stitching, the perfect lines. She lived in a world of clean edges and control. He lived in one of rent notices and inhalers and dollar store dinners. "I had took time off," he said. His voice trailed, but she caught it. "Time off?" She stopped walking. "In this industry. That's career suicide." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth lived in the silence he kept around him. Like armor. Alexandra tapped her foot, already bored. "Look, we'll do the pitch in a few minutes. Just try to look a little more prepared. All right? Investors can smell struggle." He stared at her, something wounded flickering behind his eyes. She didn't mean it to hurt. Or maybe she didn't care if it did. Either way, it landed. She walked into a conference room. He stayed outside for a moment, breathing slowly. Gripping that old phone like the one anchor in his drifting world, he turned it over in his hand. Inside the cracked screen protector was a tiny photo of his daughter's smile, peeking through the fracture lines. The only reason he hadn't replaced the phone was because replacing it meant taking money away from her treatments. Every dollar mattered. Every choice was a sacrifice. The phone buzzed suddenly. A reminder notification. Pick up medication by 6 p.m. Late test. He closed his eyes. He whispered a small promise to the empty hallway. Today, Lily, I swear. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and pushed open the conference room door. The room was huge. Floor-to-ceiling windows spilled pale morning light across a long table. The kind of place where decisions worth millions were made without ever touching the lives they affected. Alexandra stood by the head of the table, scrolling her phone. Without looking up, she said, "You're late." He wasn't. She just believed everyone should already beware. She wanted them to be. He nodded anyway and took a seat at the far end, placing a worn binder on the polished table before he could even open it. She raised her hand. "Just be aware," she said, "if this is as outdated as your phone, this won't take long." Her tone cracked something inside him. Not enough to break him. He'd been broken before, but enough to stir old ghosts. For a moment the room fell away, and he was back in dusty sand in a foreign heat, gripping not a phone but a metal badge stamped with his unit's insignia. And the sound wasn't rain, it was gunfire. And he wasn't holding a binder, he was holding a friend bleeding out. Against him, his breath trembled. He blinked, the office reappeared. He was back, but the badge was still in his pocket. Always in his pocket. Alexandra finally looked up. Her eyes caught the pain on his face just for a second, but she didn't ask, she didn't know she should. She didn't know that the man she had just laughed at had once carried people through fire. She didn't know the old phone she mocked was the only link to a daughter who looked at him like he was still a hero. She didn't know that the badge sitting inches from her could rewrite everything she believed about him. She just tossed her hair, gestured impatiently, and said, "All right, Elias, show me what you've got." The storm outside thickened. The one inside him did too, and as he opened the binder, neither of them knew that this single morning, this single meeting was about to unravel lives, expose truths, and bring a justice years overdue. But that comes later. For now, it was just a single dad with an old phone, facing a CEO about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Biggest mistake of her life. The conference room door clicked shut behind them with a soft, final sound, like fate sealing itself. Elias sat at one end of the long table, shoulders still wet from the rain, binder open in front of him. Across from him, Alexandra Hartwell barely glanced up from her phone, her fingers tapping rapid instructions to someone who would carry them out without question. "Whenever you're ready," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel, just dismissive, careless, the kind that came from living too long above the struggle of ordinary people. Elias took a breath, then another. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the first page of his binder. It wasn't fear of her. It was fear of failing Lily. Fear of what another lost opportunity would do to their fragile routines. Fear of hearing her tiny voice ask why he couldn't afford her medicine. He straightened in his seat. "I appreciate your time," he began. She didn't look up, "and I know you don't know me, but I've worked in high-risk tech implementation for 7 years, overseas, remote zones, hazard zones. I've handled systems that fail if you blink too long." Alexandra finally lifted her eyes at that. Hazard zones. He nodded. Military contractor. She guessed. There it was, the first spark of actual curiosity. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, military." Her eyes widened for half a second, then instantly hardened over again, like she regretted giving him that much reaction. Before she could ask more, the door swung open. A young janitor. Maybe 22 slipped in with a mop bucket. His hands were shaky as he bowed slightly. Azari, Miss Hartwell, I was told this room needed the floor dried before investors arrive. Alexandra clicked her tongue. They're not here yet. Make it quick. The boy nodded and hurried to the opposite corner of the room. Elias watched the kid's nervous movements and felt something familiar. He'd worn that same jittery look when he first came home, trying to re-enter a world quieter than the one he'd left. But quiet didn't mean easy. As the janitor worked, Elias continued his presentation. He spoke slowly, clearly, walking her through the systems he could build for her company: emergency response algorithms, secure data routing, field tech infrastructure that could stand up to real-world chaos, not the boardroom version of it. And slowly, very slowly, her expression shifted. Annoyance faded. Doubt softened. Interest crept in. Against her will, she leaned forward. Where'd you learn these protocols? He paused. His hand slipped into his pocket, fingers brushing the metal badge. It was cold. Always cold, like it still carried the desert nights inside it. Experience, he said quietly. A lot of it. The janitor dropped his rag dot. It slapped against the floor like a gunshot. Alexandra flinched. Elias didn't. He barely blinked. That didn't go unnoticed, but the moment passed as the boy scrambled to pick up the rag. His mop bucket wobbled dangerously, one wheel catching on the rug. Elias stood instinctively. Here, he said, moving quickly. The boy looked up, surprised. It wasn't often people in suits or near suits helped someone like him. Elias steadied the bucket before it tipped, hands gentle. You okay? Elias asked that. The kid nodded, embarrassed. Yeah, sorry, I just first week. Alexandra sighed impatiently. Just don't spill anything. Sorry, ma'am, he muttered, shrinking into himself. Elias crouched down slightly, meeting the young man's eyes. Hey, he said quietly, you're doing fine. Everybody slips on their first week. A tiny smile flickered across the boy's face. He mouthed, Thank you. Then he hurried out. When Elias turned back, Alexandra was watching him with an unreadable expression. What? He asked. She shook her head lightly. You helped him, he frowned. He needed it. Most people wouldn't have bothered, she said. Most people forget what it's like to need help. Her lips parted as if to respond, but she didn't. Instead, she gestured for him to continue. He finished his pitch carefully, completely, without rushing. And when he was done, the room felt different. Not warm, not friendly, but no longer icy. She closed the binder gently. For the first time, she really looked at him. You know, she said slowly, you're not what I expected. He didn't know if that was a compliment, but your system designs. She continued. They're impressive. Better than the last 3 major contractors I interviewed. His heart thumped. Does that mean? It means I need verification. His chest sank. Of what? He asked. Your background, she said. Your experience. You mentioned higher risk zones. Military-level protocols. If I bring you on, investors will want proof. He swallowed hard. I can provide it, he said. Good, because if you can't, this ends today. A shadow passed over his face. Not fear pain. She saw it, but misunderstood it. She stood smoothing her blazer. Bring documentation to my office by tomorrow morning. If everything checks out, we'll talk contracts. Tomorrow morning, He thought of Lily, of medication, of the ticking clock. Yes, ma'am, he said softly. He gathered his binder and stood to leave. But as he walked toward the door, she spoke again. One more thing. He turned. She pointed at his pocket. Upgrade that phone. He froze. Heat crept up his neck again. He opened his mouth, closed it. Try it again. It still works, he said quietly. It's unprofessional. It's all I can afford. The admission slipped out before he could stop it. Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it tightened. You're applying for high-tech work, she said. Show me you understand high-tech standards. He nodded stiffly, because arguing wouldn't change anything. She didn't know. She didn't understand. She didn't see that every dollar was a choice between survival and everything else. The rain outside had slowed to a mist as he stepped out of the glass tower. The street felt colder than before. He tightened his jacket around himself and checked his cracked phone to missed calls. 3 texts from Lily's school. 1 pharmacy reminder flashing like a heartbeat. He sat on a bench beneath an awning, running a hand through his damp hair. He'd done everything right. Everything he could, and still, somehow, it wasn't enough. But then he remembered something. A small face with bright eyes and tiny hands that gripped his fingers like anchors. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and whispered into the cold air, "I'll get this job. I'll get the medicine. I'll get us through this." The words steadied him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know the storm that was waiting for him inside that building. He didn't know how far Alexandra's demand for verification would go. But kindness, even small kindness, always had a way of returning. He had no idea that the help he'd offered in Nervous Janitor was about to become the spark that changed everything. The next morning rose gray and heavy, the sky thick with clouds that looked ready to burst. Elias stood outside the Hartwell Innovations Tower, clutching a thin folder that suddenly felt like it held his entire life. In many ways it did. Inside were scanned documents from his service years, deployment confirmations, commendation notes, the kind of papers typed by people who never stepped foot where those battles had been fought. But not the badge. Never the badge. The badge stayed with him, always. He straightened his shoulders, took a breath, and stepped into the building. The lobby buzzed with the sterile chatter of corporate life heels snapping against tile. Coffee machines hissing, phones ringing with urgency that never touched real danger. Elias approached the front desk, but the receptionist didn't look pleased to see him. "Oh, you." She blinked. "Miss Hartwell said to send you straight up." Her tone made it sound like an inconvenience. Elias ignored it and headed toward the elevator. He wasn't here for niceties. He was here for Lily, for the chance at something stable, something resembling a real life again. As the elevator doors opened on the top floor, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Very wrong. The hallway was packed. Employees crowded around Alexandra's office door. Voices whispered with sharp, gossipy edges. Is he really here? They've found out already. She must be furious. Why would he lie on a job application? Elias felt the words prick his skin like cold needles. Lie. He pushed through the murmuring crowd and reached the door. A security guard stepped in front of him. "You need to wait," the guard said firmly. "Ms. Hartwell is expecting me," Elias replied. "She said you're not to enter until she calls you." Crowds leaned in, like a courtroom gallery waiting for a verdict. Elias noticed a few people filming discreetly with their phones. "We're not doing this," he muttered. But they were, because suddenly the door swung open and Alexandra Hartwell herself stood there, eyes sharp and voice cold. "Elias Pierce," she said. "Come in." Every head turned. The guard stepped aside. Elias walked past the crowd and into the office, feeling dozens of eyes crawling across his back. Inside, the tension thickened. Alexandra stood behind her desk, holding the binder he had given her yesterday. Papers were scattered across the surface, service documents, deployment sheets, signatures he recognized. But all of them pulled apart as if under autopsy. "Shut the door," she said. He did. Then she looked up, and something in her expression chilled him deeper than the rain outside. "I had your documents checked," she said. Elias felt his pulse spike. "Okay." "They're inconsistent." He blinked. "What do you mean?" She lifted one paper, shaking it slightly. "The dates listed for your service don't match the public database. Your deployment codes aren't showing up under your name. The commendation letter doesn't have an official watermark." He stepped forward. "Because some of that information is classified." "I told you, don't," she snapped. The word cracked like a whip. You said you had higher risk training. But the system shows nothing. Nothing, Mr. Pierce." His throat tightened. It wasn't his place to tell her. He'd signed agreements. He'd lived missions that didn't exist on paper. He'd buried men whose names were never recorded. "Alexandra," he said quietly. "I can explain." "No," she cut in. "You can't. Because you know what this looks like. A man walking in here with a made-up story to get into a tech company. A fraud. Someone trying to scam their way into high-level access." The words landed like blows. "I'm not a fraud," he said. She scoffed. "Then show me verifiable proof. Because right now all I see is an unemployed single father who's desperate. So desperate, he forged his background." His jaw clenched. The door behind him opened. A security guard stepped inside. Elias stiffened. Alexandra pointed at him tiredly. "Escort him out." The humiliation struck before the shock did. "No," Elias said, voice low. "Your system database isn't going to show what I did. That's not how it works." She gave him a pitying look that cut deeper than anger. "I know you need this job," she said, "but lying your way into it won't help your daughter." He froze. You looked into my family." "I look into everyone's background," she said. "Standard risk prevention. And now I know you're unstable, financially strained, and willing to manipulate the truth to secure employment." His chest felt tight. It was getting hard to breathe. "This is wrong," he whispered. "What's wrong?" she replied. "Is you thinking you could get away with it?" The guard stepped forward and gripped his arm. "Let go," Elias said. The guard tightened his grip. "I said let go." His voice rang through the office like a thunderclap. Everyone outside the glass walls turned. Phones lifted. Eyes widened. The guard recoiled, startled. Elias hadn't yelled like that since the desert. Since the night everything went sideways. Since the night he'd lost more than he'd ever admit. Alexandra watched him closely. But not with fear. With curiosity. "You reacted like someone who's been trained," she murmured. He didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the metal badge, the only piece of truth he still carried. He placed it on her desk gently, like setting down a piece of his soul. Alexandra frowned. "What is that?" "A classified operations badge," he said. "Issued off record. For missions that never went into the database. Missions your verification software will never have access to." She picked it up, inspecting it like it was some souvenir. "That's convenient," she said coldly. "It's reality," he replied. She dropped the badge back onto the desk. "It's still not proof." Something inside him collapsed a little. Not broken, just tired. Exhausted from fighting battles no one believed in. Exhausted from going through a world that didn't understand the scars hidden beneath a shirt collar. "I came here to work," he said quietly, "not to be humiliated." "You humiliated yourself," she retorted. "Secure to please escort Mr. Pierce out of the building." Permanently. The guard stepped forward. Elias didn't resist. Not because he was guilty, but because he was done. As he walked toward the door, a new wave of whispers rose from the crowd outside. "Is that the guy who lied? They're kicking him out. I knew something was off. Single dad or not. That's pathetic. Look at him pretending to be military." His vision blurred, but not from anger. From shame. Raw, burning shame he hadn't felt even in his worst moments overseas. The guard walked him all the way to the lobby doors. Each step felt heavier than the last. When the guard opened the glass exit, Elias stepped out into the cold morning drizzle. The door shut behind him with a metallic click. He stood there, numb. Inside, he heard faint applause as if the office had rid itself of a nuisance. As if justice had been served. He pulled up his hood against the rain and whispered to himself, voice cracking, "I didn't lie." But no one inside that building cared. Not yet, because by tomorrow morning, his truth would break through their walls like a storm they never saw coming. Break through their walls like a storm they never saw coming. The conference room felt colder than usual. Not physically, no. The thermostat hummed quietly in its steady routine, but emotionally cold. The kind of cold that crawls beneath collars and into bones. The kind of cold that comes from dread. From betrayal, from knowing you're walking into a room where you're not just outnumbered, but already judged. Mark stood at the long glass table, hands clasped, shoulders straight. The faint tremble in his fingers, the only sign of nerves. His best shirt, one he ironed twice that morning, still carried the faint scent of starch. Behind him, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting him in a warm glow that contradicted everything he felt. Across from him sat the department heads, polished, impassive, suits perfectly pressed, eyes lowered to printed agendas in front of them. Except one, Clara Reynolds, the CEO. Perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect expression. And, Mark noted, a perfect mask. No one knew that this woman had waited in line behind him 2 days earlier at the grocery store. No one knew she was the one who saw his cracked phone case, chuckled at the ancient model, and then froze when she noticed the military badge his late wife's badge slid carefully between the transparent plastic and the back of the phone. No one knew the way she had apologized, voice trembling, the embarrassment flushing her cheeks, or how she followed him out to the parking lot afterward, asking softly if he had served, only to visibly crumble when he told her. Not me, my wife. But today, all they saw was their CEO, and what they believed was a lazy, underperforming single father on the chopping block. Let's begin, said a man in a navy suit, flipping open his folder. We're here to address multiple concerns regarding Mr. Turner's performance. Mark kept his jaw tight, his voice ready but steady. He had rehearsed the night before with his daughter Emma leaning against him, giving him pep talks, like she used to see him give her before school spelling tests. He wasn't prepared for what came next. Before we proceed, Clara said suddenly, her tone calm but cutting, I'd like to hear from Mr. Turner directly. That alone broke the rhythm. Several faces lifted in surprise if she'd disrupted an already decided script. Mark blinked. Ma'am, tell us, she said, leaning forward. Why do you believe your metrics dipped these last 2 quarters? He swallowed. He could lie. He could smooth it over. He could give numbers and charts and polite excuses like everyone else does in these meetings. But he was tired of hiding, tired of pretending. Losing his wife hadn't split his life in 2. He inhaled. My daughter needed me, he said quietly. Ah. Murmur moved across the table. My hours shifted. Her health. Her school. It's been hard. I've been trying to keep everything together, okay? The man in Navy side, annoyed. Personal issues aren't an excuse for poor performance. Let him finish, Clara said sharply. Silence. Even the HVAC seemed to pause. Mark continued, voice raw. My wife served overseas. She died in a convoy accident a year ago this month. And every day since then, I've been doing everything I can to hold my little girl's world together, while pretending mine didn't fall apart. Clara's eyes softened in a way only he noticed, but the others. Some shifted uncomfortably, but others looked cold. Navy suit cleared his throat with confidence he hadn't earned. With all respect, emotional hardship cannot justify failing to meet baseline expectations. Mark felt his chest tighten. This was the injustice, the moment he'd feared, the moment when his wife's sacrifice, his daughter's pain, his own efforts, would all be reduced to a footnote under performance issues. He opened his mouth to speak, but he didn't have to, because Clara stood up, and the entire room froze. I think, she began slowly, it's time all of you heard something I've kept private. Her voice had weight now, something heavy, something real. She walked around the table. Each heel click echoed like a gavel. You see, 2 days ago, I met Mr. Turner, not here, not as his CEO, but as a stranger in a grocery store. A stir went through the room, and she exhaled, visibly emotional. I made a mistake. I laughed at his old phone. It looked outdated, damaged. I assumed it meant something about him. Navy suit shifted uncomfortably. But then, she continued, her voice catching. I saw the military badge inside the case, and I learned it belonged to his wife. I learned he carried it everywhere with him. Not for show. Not as a decoration, but as a memory. A daily reminder of the woman who gave her life for this country. Now, no one moved, and I realized something. Clara added softly. Sometimes the people who look like they're struggling are the ones fighting harder than any of us can imagine. Mark stared at her. This was the reveal. Not loud. Not dramatic, but devastating. Clara turned to the table of executives. For the last 2 quarters, Mr. Turner has still delivered 83% of his output despite raising a child alone through grief. Meanwhile, several of you have missed targets during months of luxury travel. Several faces turned red. She wasn't done. And if we're discussing performance, she reached into a folder and placed printed sheets in front of each executive. You'll see Mr. Turner's team rated him highest in leadership, morale support, and crisis management. They credit him for keeping them steady during 2 department reorganizations that all of you approved. Few jaws dropped. Mark had never seen these. And one more thing, Clara said, her voice rising. Not a single sick day taken. Not one. He used his lunch breaks to attend his daughter's therapy appointments and worked nights to finish tasks. Navy Suit opened his mouth, but she raised a hand. No, she said. We're not terminating the single father who kept this place afloat. We're terminating the mindset that people are disposable. Murmurs erupted, effective immediately. Clara continued. Mr. Turner will receive a flexible schedule, administrative support, and back pay for overtime. Mark felt something in his chest crack open, like a window after years of stale air relief, warmth, hope. Double quotes and one final note, Clara said, turning to him with a small smile that only he understood. Your phone may be old, but the story it carries, it's priceless. Thank you for letting me learn from it. Mark swallowed hard. He wasn't used to being defended. He wasn't used to justice. But today he got both, and it changed everything.